But let's now talk about Donald Trump. He has just said that he is supposed to be dead in a newspaper interview following the failed assassination attempt on Saturday. And his comments came as he was due to arrive at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. We're going to speak to Joseph Grogan. He was Donald Trump's former director of domestic policy and an assistant to President Donald Trump. But first of all, let's talk to a reporter at The Hill, Julia Manchester. Welcome to the show, Julia.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So you're in Milwaukee. What's the mood?
So I'm actually not in Milwaukee. I am in Washington, D.C. The mood is pretty, I think, just across the country. It's in shock, really. This was not something anyone was expecting, but it's not necessarily surprising. We've seen a rise in political violence really across this country and various parts of the world over the past 10 years or so. So I think there was this concern that something like this could happen, but I think there's a lot of worry and questions in particular about how someone was able to get on a roof across from that rally and essentially evade Secret Service and law enforcement.
So this issue is so complicated politically because obviously one's initial instinct is to condemn this terrible attempt on President Trump's life, to thank the Lord that he is safe and not dead. But at the same time, you can't get away from the fact that President Trump over many years has encouraged political violence. It must cause some complications in how Americans, particularly in Washington, process this.
Well, first of all, I think political violence has taken place on both sides of the aisle in, America. I think it's important to point out that in 2017, Congressman Steve Scalise, a Republican from Louisiana, was shot at a congressional baseball game practice. And then you've seen, for example, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, who her husband was home and was, the victim of a home invasion and an assault a few years ago. So we're seeing this really on both sides of the aisle. President Trump has certainly, there's been this, potentially violent rhetoric we've seen a little bit from, over the years from him. But, this morning, American media is covering remarks from President Biden at a fundraiser recently in which he said we need to put a bullseye on Trump. So I think there's this overall reckoning on both sides of the aisle, essentially saying we need to take it down. Speaker Mike Johnson was on national television saying that. We saw President Biden saying that yesterday in his primetime address. So I think there's this, this problem goes beyond Donald Trump. He is just, his rhetoric is just a part of it.
And do you think the Republican leadership will genuinely dial it down? I mean, Speaker Mike Johnson, who is a Republican, of course, saying that it has to be dialed down is significant. But then you have the potential vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, saying that it's the Democrats' fault that Trump was targeted. Do you think we're going to see a genuine change in rhetoric, or will it go back to conspiracy theories and blaming the Democrats?
I think we'll see. I mean, I think it's important to point out that it's not just, there are many Republicans who are condemning this. And, once again, this is taking place on both sides of the aisle. And I just want to be very clear about it. J.D. Vance is getting this coverage because he is the potential front runner for the vice presidential pick. But we'll see. I mean, I think there is this push from Republican leadership. I think it is notable that Donald Trump has called for national unity, and he himself seems to have dialed down his rhetoric. In fact, he and President Biden spoke about this on Saturday night. They talked about this on the phone. We're told it was a brief yet respectful conversation. So that, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. That's Julia Manchester, a reporter at The Hill. Now we get to talk to somebody who has worked with President Trump. That's Joe Grogan, the former director of domestic policy and assistant to President Donald Trump. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us how you reacted when you heard the news that there'd been an attempt on President Trump's life. You've worked with the man.
Yeah, I mean, as you can understand, it's a very emotional moment as you're trying to piece together what happened. I was actually on a plane getting ready to take off from Washington, D.C., and had been in Milwaukee earlier in the week helping some of the the pre-setup for the convention, and just trying to piece it together. You have shock and rage and tremendous sadness, and worry and concern, not just for President Trump, but for people I know who were at that event, and for all the people. I've been to plenty of those rallies when I worked for President Trump, and spoken with those people who, Hillary Clinton had called deplorables, and part of a basket of deplorables, and they're frequently mischaracterized and slandered as MAGA extremists and targeted themselves, and yet they stand up for President Trump. And I've had plenty of conversations with people at rallies, enjoyed those conversations, understanding who they are and why they supported Trump. So the whole situation was just terrible to witness, and thinking about Trump's family himself, and also him and what he's gone through from the moment he was elected in 2016, having his election delegitimized, the target of terrible, terrible attacks. Being told that he never, having people say he wouldn't have won without Russia collusion, which is a lie, and having to go through all these ridiculous investigations and impeachment. So, but I hope, as Julia said, it's a time for the country to take a step back, and a reckoning. And you referenced language of British politicians and other world leaders. I think people should all tone their language down, and we should recognize how what a tinderbox it is, and not use as inflammatory language.
And what do you think is the next move for President Trump? I mean, he said that. It was remarkable to see him immediately in the seconds after the shooting, how vigorous he was. He has talked for America to unite. Do you think the sort of mood of reconciliation, if you like, and calm will prevail, or will extremists on both sides try to ramp this up?
Well, look, the Trump that I knew was always willing to work with Democrats, and he always had his hands slapped away. Like I said, from the moment that he became elected, he was attacked and vilified, and his presidency was delegitimized. The Democrats just couldn't let it go. The guy that I saw stand up with blood on his face is the guy that I loved working for. It's the guy that so many people that I know are still working for, working on the campaign, volunteering, but also, employed. Some people have been with him for 7 years, and to get up like that and raise his fist and tell his supporters to fight. It's why people love him. And so many of us have had private conversations. How does he keep going? He had unbelievable energy at the time, but all these politically motivated prosecutions, the attacks on him, the slanders, he could be sitting in New York or Florida, playing golf all the time. He was beloved among Democrats before he chose to run for president. He was a leading figure in America. Talk show hosts wanted him on all the time. And he ran for president, and he was rewarded with vitriol, and he just keeps going. And it's one of the reasons why his supporters and those who, like myself, who were privileged to work for him, just loved working for him so much.